So I'm joined by a woman now who knows a lot about ovarian cancer. Jane was diagnosed in 2017 and given between 5 and 15 years. She's dedicated the years since to helping women learn more about the cancer, how to spot symptoms, through her charitable trust, Cure Our Ovarian Cancer. Welcome to the platform, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me today.
I thank you for joining us and for the work that you're doing for other women, because I think having an experience like yours, it takes a special kind of person to then go, actually, I'm dealing with all this myself, but I'm going to start a charitable trust. I'm going to do all this work to help other women. Is that something that you kind of immediately thought about, or is it as you've gone through the journey you decided to get into helping others?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. I don't think I set out for the goal of running a charity as a volunteer, unpaid on my own while living with this cancer, but I certainly recognised when I was diagnosed, the more that I was learning, it became really apparent that there were significant disparities with ovarian cancer and how that's being considered and treated and funded compared to other health conditions. And I looked very hard for other organisations that were servicing this space, and unfortunately there were huge gaps, and it really came down to a situation where it was like, well, if I don't do something, no one's going to be doing something. And so
here you are.
I've done it because it's really important, and we need to speak a lot more about it. So it's great to have this opportunity to talk about the issues today.
Now, I understand that there are multiple types of ovarian cancer, and, you know, as with most cancers probably, but you were diagnosed with a stage 2 low-grade serous carcinoma, and I read here that it typically affects younger women like yourself, and it's usually resistant to chemotherapy. So your charity focuses on this particular type. How common is it for young women to get this one?
Yeah, so internationally we focus on that type. Within New Zealand we focus on all types of ovarian cancer. So it accounts for about 5% roughly of ovarian cancer diagnoses, but half of the women who get this cancer are in their 20s, 30s and 40s, and indeed some are diagnosed in their teens. And
wow.
The overall survival of it's well under 30%, could be as low as 15 or less. So it's definitely quite a difficult cancer, and it's so ovarian cancer, 2/3 of women are diagnosed with high-grade serous, and that's the most common type. And then of the remaining third, about 6 types of ovarian cancer make up most of that third. And then there are over 20 other extremely rare ovarian cancers.
Oh, God,
and it's really a case. Yeah, so it's a very diverse cancer, I think, compared to some other cancer types. And what's really happened is ovarian cancer's had a lot less funding proportional to how many women get the disease than some other diseases. And then within that, predominantly most of the funding has been going to high-grade serous ovarian cancer. So internationally, we've worked with the low-grade serous cancer community. There wasn't any way to donate, know that your donation would go to research on that cancer, and so we set up pathways overseas so that women with this cancer type could donate and know that it would be helping research on their cancer. And we've funded about $500,000 of research overseas through that, which has been great. And then, also an awful lot of work just to improve the situation in New Zealand for all women with every type of ovarian cancer as well.
That's incredible work. I just had a conversation with Dr. Max Sawa, and he does research in New Zealand. And And he was just laying out, I was actually a bit speechless at the end of it. He was laying out the dire situation of funding, but also of accessing biological matter to test that they can then use in meaningful ways to, develop screening or treatments or that kind of thing. And the listeners will know, I was basically speechless at the end at how difficult it seems to be to get what's needed to do this research. It must be very frustrating for you.
Yeah, and I think it's a situation where, it's particularly difficult in New Zealand. The last time the government funded any dedicated ovarian cancer research funding was 2013. And this, ovarian cancer kills more women than all of the other gynecological cancers combined, more than the road toll, which we spend $100 million every year on. But also, even though there are some countries doing a better job than us, on the whole, every country is doing a pretty awful job. And so the challenges, I think, are particularly present in New Zealand, but there are also challenges faced overseas as well. And that's hard because I think there's some cancers where New Zealand doesn't have as much focus, but it's picked up overseas. And overseas there are countries that are putting significant resources into it, whereas ovarian cancer is something where in New Zealand we actually need to step up and say we value women's health and we recognise that this is an issue, that has been ignored for a long time, in part because it does affect the reproductive organs and we haven't as a society been that comfortable about talking about them, and there's lots of just sort of system things that no one set out intentionally to say we're going to do a worse job at this and deliberately underfund it, but because of a bunch of interactions of systems and societal things, that's been the end outcome. And I think, as a country, we're relatively wealthy, we have a pretty good track record as far as women's rights go, and it's something where we should be stepping up and saying, yes, this is important and we're going to do this for New Zealand women. There's no reason why we couldn't be doing a lot more than our fair share in this area, and recognition that a lot of countries aren't. Because, like $100 million for the road toll, if we
That's
spent $100 million this year on ovarian cancer research, that would probably be the amount that the whole of the United States is spending on it.
Wow.
So when you look at it like that, it's not been an intentional choice, but it is a choice that we're making as a society, and I think we need to make different choices.
Oh, completely. And I think that comparison to the road toll will really resonate with people, because people can see how much we spend on our ads and whatnot for the road. I know I just had a conversation yesterday with the opposition transport spokesperson talking about how much they'd spent on these campaigns, and it's millions and millions of dollars. And you make the point that these are all choices that the government's making, that we as society are making. And I also take your point about, talking about our reproductive organs, talking about sexual health, those kind of things have been really difficult to do. Are you, I guess, heartened by the fact that, well, I've certainly noticed in the past few years that cervical cancer discussion has progressed in terms of the encouragement publicly women are given to get a smear, but obviously a smear doesn't diagnose ovarian cancer, but at least the conversation's moving there maybe?
Yeah, I think it's kind of difficult for ovarian cancer women because we see this and I think with cervical cancer we see that it's good that they're encouraging women to go to screening. There's still we've put all our eggs on the screening basket, I think, as far as research goes. Like treatments for cervical cancer in terms of survival, if you get it and it's not caught at an early stage through screening, that hasn't had as much resources. But definitely when we see things around probably breast cancer, that can sometimes be a trigger, I think. Not because you want any less for breast cancer, let's be clear, or prostate cancer or any of those things. But just you see that there's all this discussion and you're like, well, we're really bad in this corner and no one's talking about us. But I think it is really positive. What I find quite heartening, is that we're able to have these open discussions about cervical cancer, and it's something where there's no shame or stigma around that now, and they're working really hard to address that, and it is becoming a lot more normalised, and just, discussions around periods and endometriosis and all these other associated conditions as well really, I guess, pave the framework so that we can go on the radio and TV and talk about ovarian cancer, and people less often get, most people are pretty comfortable with that, but it's still something where I think even as women being diagnosed, I talk about it a lot now, but when I was first diagnosed, it wasn't just that it was a cancer, it was that it was ovarian cancer, and that's something that, I'd never probably talked to my ovaries with anyone before, certainly not in a public discussion, and it wouldn't have been something that I would have brought up, with anyone that I didn't know particularly well, or
on the radio,
that kind. And so I think it's really positive that we're hearing a lot more discussions about that. And even Lydia Ko, in some ways, it's a bit like that shouldn't be a news article that she talked about her period, half of the population have had them at some stage. But it is good that at least we're having those discussions now and it's becoming more normalised. And I think that is really important. I think ovarian cancer has probably struggled because society hasn't been in a place really ready to talk about those issues, and I think the really good thing is that now as a society we're ready to talk about these things, and I hope in being ready to talk about them that we'll be ready to act on them.
That's the important thing. Now, would you mind talking us through your experience of, what symptoms you had and how that led to you getting diagnosed?
Yes, definitely. So I had symptoms for quite a long time before I was diagnosed, and unfortunately that's very characteristic of ovarian cancer. We did a survey as a charity of the New Zealand Facebook support group, and on average women had to visit their doctor 3 to 5 times before they were tested for ovarian cancer. So it's a lot, and there's a lot of reasons as to why that is, but the really common symptoms are because your ovaries are located to the sides at the top of the uterus, and so they're very close to the bladder. They're right next to the bowels, and so it's really common for people to have symptoms that, to be honest, are a bit similar to what people say they experience during pregnancy. So people needing to go to the bathroom a lot more, in terms of needing to urinate more frequently, changes in bowel habits, and so often that's constipation, but it can also mimic sort of irritable bowel symptoms. Some women go the other way, and then that can also affect eating, and so people find that they eat smaller portions. For me, I guess it became more like every meal felt like Christmas dinner when you're like, oh my goodness, I ate so much. and you sort of, it's very easy, because we're not telling women that these are potentially serious symptoms, it's very easy to rationalise it. And in my case, I was seeing the doctor quite frequently and being told, no, everything's okay, and we don't need to do any tests. And so it's like, oh, well, I'm just snacking more, but I was snacking more because I had a very busy, active life and I needed to get the calories in. And so I compensated by eating lots, and that wasn't, by eating often, and that wasn't the reason why I wasn't able to eat as much in meals. It was how I was adjusting for it. And I think that's something where often women do make those kind of adjustments. And tiredness is another common one. People can feel bloated or have their tummy getting bigger, even though they might be not eating as much because of that. And also, painful intercourse. People can have abnormal vaginal bleeding or discharge, indigestion, and unexplained weight changes. So there's quite a variety of symptoms that people can have, but really like the bowel and the bladder and the changes to eating and bloating are probably the most common ones. And so it's a bit unusual in the sense that the main symptoms aren't really gynecological, and I think sometimes that's, I mean, I'd never heard of ovarian cancer before I was diagnosed. I think a lot of women haven't. Certainly not many know the symptoms, any of the symptoms before they're diagnosed and have this experience. But it's not something you necessarily think about because you don't associate your ovaries with those kind of symptoms, and that's where education so that people know that these can potentially be a cause is important.
It is really important because I think a lot of, as well, you mentioned pregnancy, but also for older women, slightly older, menopause can also have some of those symptoms as well. So I guess it's knowing when to go, maybe this isn't actually this explanation that I've put on it. But I know often for women, especially when it comes to our reproductive area, we're actually quite used to soldiering on, and we're quite, it's like, oh, well, it's just my period, or it's just, pregnancy, we just deal with these things. So what would you say to a woman who's listening to this right now and thinks, I have a few of those things?
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, we are very conditioned as females to not to just put up with things. And I think it's really important to note that most of the time, if someone has these symptoms, they're not ovarian cancer, but there is a small chance that it could be. And so if you notice any of those symptoms and they're not going away after 2 weeks, there's something that keep happening, then it is important to raise it with your doctor. And if you raise it with your doctor and they send you away, but they keep happening, to go back again. And the tests for ovarian cancer, to know what they are, it's a blood test and it's an ultrasound. So they're not, they're very low risk tests. And so it's something where we really need to shift as a society and make sure that we actually rule ovarian cancer out instead of making women come back and back and back until their symptoms become so severe that you're like, okay, now it's very likely to be this, in testing. We need to test much more proactively and early. So there aren't any tests if you don't have symptoms, but if you have symptoms and they're lasting longer than 2 weeks, it is definitely worth going and getting checked. And people can find more information out on that on our website. The address is ovariancancer.org.nz. If they want to read more about the symptoms, and it talks through what to expect at your doctor's appointment and some things that you can ask.
Those that test is very non-invasive, really, compared to, I guess, what I was expecting, my own kind of assumption, and it also would seem to be lower cost. So is there an issue with doctors feeling there's a cost barrier to them sending people to get these tests, or is it just a knowledge thing? Or
I think it's an issue where the DHBs have probably rationed it. The blood test is very, it's pretty cheap. It costs the DHBs about $20, but it's on its own, it misses half of early ovarian cancers, and it can be raised when someone doesn't have ovarian cancer. So both of the tests independently aren't perfect, but used together, they're very good. And so the ultrasound is more expensive. That costs about $250 to $300, but that is very comparable to what a mammogram would cost. And so that's the thing where we're quite happy as a society to fund it for a mammogram. The chance of someone having ovarian cancer, if they have these symptoms, is the same as someone without symptoms rocking up to a mammogram and then finding breast cancer. So, it is something where we do need to put more resources in it. And I think, unfortunately, it's probably indicative that There is a massive shortage of sonographers in the country. Probably a lot of the gynecological departments are struggling in the DHBs, and then as a symptom of that, ovarian cancer is kind of missing out. But it is important to put appropriate resourcing in there. And it's hard for the doctors because they have to know a lot about a lot of things. And, most of the time someone comes, they won't have ovarian cancer, but it's really important that they are testing to find the people who do and find them early, and that becomes very hard if they're referring people and the DHBs are going no. And we did some Official Information Act requests across DHBs across the country and found that there's a huge difference. Some DHBs, we sent them scenarios of women with potential ovarian cancer symptoms and different blood test results and things, and in some situations some DHBs were like, yes, would see this person in 2 weeks. Other DHBs were like, yes, but they'd have to wait 4 months. And other DHBs
4 months is
were like, no, we won't.
Way too late.
Other DHBs were like, no, we won't see this person at all.
Oh.
And so, that puts the primary care doctors in a really difficult situation. And I guess that's where it's really important for women to know those symptoms and be their best advocate in that situation to navigate through the barriers, and we're working as an organisation to try and get the government to address some of those things too, to make it a lot easier for women to get diagnosed.
Thank you so much for your time today. And before you head off, would you like to share with our listeners how, if they wanted to support the work that you guys are doing, how they would do that?
Oh, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Yes, so you can make a donation or to fundraise for ovarian cancer, or even just to, learn more information, go to ovariancancer.org.nz, or you can look us up on Facebook. Our Facebook account's Cure Our Ovarian Cancer NZ. And please, when you go away from this, have a talk to other people, tell one or two other people today about this article that you've listened to on the news and radio. That's really helpful.
Thank you so much, Jane, and all the best with your journey going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much.